That's a decent amount of money. Over $750 million a year in revenue. Mark alluded to the fact that it's his belief, I don't want to put words in his mouth, but it's a lot of people's belief that some of those funds were used to help facilitate the coup in July of 2016. We don't prove that in this book. We have our suspicions, but we don't go there. Our focus is almost entirely on the conduct of these schools and the environment in which they operate. So that is our focus. I will tell you in advance, we don't connect those dots. We do not have that evidence. We cannot trace that money or trace those checks as I stand here today. But we have our suspicions, certainly. In this book, over 600 pages, we document discrimination. Discrimination of children, special education, sort of impoverished children, English as a second language children, all documented actions taken against these schools around the country under those circumstances. Discrimination against teachers for pay, hiring, promotion. There's been financial mismanagement and insolvency. Mark alluded to mafia-like behavior. Absolutely. Another analogy to be drawn is a Ponzi scheme. We're all familiar with those, and Madoff and people like that has all the earmarks of sort of Ponzi scheme behavior too. You're a taxpayer in one town, you pay your taxes, you're a parent, you put into the system, and then lo and behold, you find out that several months later some of those funds are being used over here in a completely different community to prop up that school. Because these operators manage multiple schools in different regions, and they seem to draw no lines between and among the schools. It's just one big happy family of schools that they wash money around back and forth. Cash here, cash there. They draw no lines. Completely contrary to the procedures and the rules governing these different charter schools. Forced tithing, the tuzuk, political donations forced by teachers to local politicians, national politicians, local causes. A constant lack of transparency with transactions and supposedly public meetings. Supposed public meetings conducted in Turkish, in communities where no one other than the board and some of the teachers at the school speak Turkish. Highly suspect activity constituting what is very apparent fraud or fraud-like behavior, including really absurd insider real estate deals. You saw some of that in the footage there. I want to speak directly to an issue right here in Chicago. There's a school in Chicago, a Gulen school called the Chicago Math and Science Academy. They bought their school, they bought their property in 2009 for about $10.5 million. Normal transaction. Less than 2 years after that, they sold the property to New Plan Learning, which is a Gulen affiliated organization with overlapping boards and personnel. They sold it at a loss. They then entered into a 35-year lease with New Plan for the same building that they had owned before for approximately $1 million to $1.2 million a year. So you have two organizations affiliated with each other. The school itself owns the property, which it bought for $10 million, sells it at a loss to the affiliate organization, and enters into an agreement they're bound to for 35 years to pay them almost $40 million over that period of time for a building they had already owned for 10. One of the best real estate deals you're ever going to hear about if you're the people that bought the building itself. At the time, the school board's president was a paid consultant for New Plan Learning, which bought the building. conflicts of interest and sweetheart deals or self-dealing are absolutely part of the mindset and part of the workings of this organization. It is how they operate. And what happened in Chicago has happened in Texas, has happened in Massachusetts, has happened in New Jersey, over and over and over again. And if there's one thing that I learned investigating fraud for years and years and years, is that the people who engage in fraudulent behavior find something that works and they repeat it. They just find a new sucker down the road, a new community, a new group, a new mark, and they sell the same thing again until somebody stops them or until somebody stops buying it. And there's nobody out there stopping it right now, and a lot of people buying it. I will say, Amsterdam and Partners is not involved in the charter school debate. Again, I came to you, I taught in charter school. I see the value of charter schools. In certain circumstances, in certain environments, I think a charter school can be a very positive part of the educational environment for a lot of families and a lot of communities. No argument for me. Not these guys. These guys don't run charter schools. These are fundraising opportunities. These are borderline fraudulent lemonade stands that have grown into schools where they can just bilk taxpayers out of money. They're not educating people. They have a great PR machine behind it, but they're not educating people. I really wanted to come here today, too, to speak to you as a parent of school-age children. I have four kids. Having been in education, the education of my children is really important to me. So where I send them to school is a big decision for me. I put a lot of thought into it, a lot of energy into it. Let me tell you about some circumstances that some parents have faced around the country with these Gulen schools. A few anecdotes. They're not as visible as what you saw in the film, so they may not be as compelling, but I want you to hear what's happening, because what's happening at one school is happening at another. I guarantee it. I can't give you the documented evidence from state to state, but I guarantee what is happening in New Mexico is happening in Florida, is happening in Minnesota, without any question whatsoever. So we have evidence in New Mexico of a student who was targeted with racial slurs by other students. This happens. This is part of America, part of what happens. But how did they handle it? They ignored it. They ignored everything about it. How did the parents of that targeted student find this out? Social media. Another student had videoed the student being attacked with racial slurs. So the parent finds out after the fact, approaches the school. How does the Gulen school handle it? First, they deny it. Then, when confronted with the video, whom did they punish? Not the individual making the racial slurs, the student who videoed it, because it looked bad for them. So they punish the child who videoed the bad conduct and didn't do anything to the child who is targeting someone with racial slurs. New Mexico. In Florida, a student took pictures with his phone at the school of some events, some materials, fairly harmless stuff. They went crazy, took the student, detained him in the office, physically detained him in the office, took his phone away from him. The mother came to school. They detained her in the office. Big bodyguard type guys stood by the door, refused to let them leave the office. They were physically detained for hours in this office, asked to leave, were not allowed to leave. Finally, were allowed to leave on the condition the kid be expelled from school. But this kid was a good student. He was doing well. He had AP tests he was going to take. So what does he do? The mom, they leave. The mom buckles under. He ends up taking the AP test. They're put in a completely uncompromising position where they have to deal with the bullying and the basically essentially the kidnapping that they confronted in order for him to take the AP test. That's Florida. In Minnesota, special ed students attending these Gulen schools were not allowed to wear the school uniform. Why? We believe because it didn't reflect on the school in the way the school administrators wanted to. These were special ed kids. They weren't the cream of the crop. They looked different. They acted different. We don't want them wearing the uniform. We don't want those kind of pictures taken. We don't want that kind of publicity. They can't wear our uniform. Ohio. They bribed students to change answers on standardized tests that the other kids were taking to improve and inflate their state test scores. Bribed them. Pizza, little cash. You take their tests over. You change the answers because they're not good enough for us. We want to do this. New York. Taped a student's mouth shut. Stabbed a student. Couldn't control the classroom. Literally put tape over a student's mouth. Chose only male students for certain extracurriculars, including robotics. Girls can't do robotics. They're not smart enough, I guess. So we'll just choose the boys to do robotics. A couple of kids from upstate New York, from the Gulen schools, performed very well in those schools. Parents incredibly proud of them. They went off to some prestigious private colleges back east. They were back home. It's just a handful of kids, just an anecdote. Just a couple of kids. They were back home by the end of the first semester of college because they were so ill-prepared and so over their head, they could not handle the college work because of where they had gone to school. So now they collectively are all working part-time at a pizza place and sort of commiserating with each other, trying to figure out how to get back to college and make up for the work that they didn't do in high school to prepare them. And their parents are absolutely speechless, don't know what to do. How do you handle a situation like that? Many parents won't even come to us. They fear the repercussions. They fear what will happen to their children, to their friends. It's not violence, typically, but it's legal attacks or the ability to immediately terminate the child's tenure at that school. It's nothing for these people to send cease and desist letters, have their lawyers send cease and desist letters to parents or teachers or anyone else who asks questions or speaks up. It's not even criticism. It's the asking of a question. So it chills any type of negative comment or questioning. So a lot of parents, these are stories of brave people who've come forward. A lot of people won't. When I taught years ago, I taught in inner city Los Angeles and in inner city Providence, Rhode Island. I taught in some very difficult circumstances. I had kids stab each other. I had some gunfire in a class, or in a general area of a school. I had lunch personnel assaulted. There was a drug murder about 100 feet from one of my classrooms. So I saw a lot of things, and my students did too, a lot of things. I would rather my children go to some of the schools where I taught years ago in that environment than any Gulen school today, no matter how they trumpet their success or no matter what they say they're doing at those schools. I would rather my children go to any one of those schools I was at before that were just in the worst circumstances imaginable. I'd rather they not go to school. than go to a Gulen school right now. And I say that to you not as a lawyer at Amsterdam and Partners. I say that to you as a parent of 4 children that I care about and love very deeply. I would never send them to a Gulen school. And with that, I will turn it over. I'm happy to answer any questions or talk about the book. And it is available free at empireofdeceit.com. There's an interactive map. You can click on a state. You can sort of wander around, compare some things. We've tried to make it as user-friendly as possible. Even if you're not completely taken with the topic, it's still interesting. Go to the website, goof around with it a little bit. I think it's fascinating stuff. And I appreciate very much the opportunity to speak here today. It's a real privilege. I'm happy to answer any questions. Yeah.
Are there any court cases in the U.S. against Gulen or anything related to them at all?
It's a good question. There have been numerous discrimination-related lawsuits filed against the various schools or school operators around the country, from Colorado to Texas and everywhere in between. They tend to be very specific cases. A good example, some teachers in Colorado brought a lawsuit related to pay disparity. And the Turkish teachers were paid more than they were as part of the tithing exercise. The Gulenists are very good at getting ahead of those lawsuits. Sometimes before they're filed or right when they're filed, they will settle them and quiet them down very quickly, because there's a secret to that, right? If the more a lawsuit is in play, the more the media gets a hold of it, the more the public can kind of consume it. But if you shut it down quickly, you settle it out, or you do what needs to be done early, then nobody hears about it. And that's very true also for lawsuits that technically have been brought also by the Education Department or the EEOC or people who are concerned with civil rights or other discrimination issues. So in Texas, for example, where they were running afoul of special ed laws or ESL or underprivileged laws in terms of funding and how they handled their teaching and their resourcing, they resolved those very quickly with those federal agencies so as to kind of sweep them under the rug. So the answer is yes, but they haven't gotten a lot of traction or a lot of publicity.
Well, I hope your work and efforts end up bringing up some traction or something, because this is really, listening to you is very, we already know a lot of things already, and reading the book is great. But I think it's also negative publicity for Turkey in the end. You know, when I listen to you, if I wasn't Turkish, you know, if I didn't know the background, I also hear a lot of negative thing about what the Turkish people are doing in the U.S. Yeah. And I don't like that, because a lot of other Turkish people are very much contributing to the U.S. in any way, in many ways. So, I mean, I think your work should be towards getting them into the courts, getting them punished, and getting them whatever they deserve, get what they deserve.
Well, I appreciate those comments very much, and you should know, as should the Turkish people who are in the U.S., that when we have conversations with journalists, when we have conversations with politicians or anyone, we are very, very careful about how we articulate this. The Turkish people have a long and rich history and tradition, culturally, politically, otherwise. They have been great friends to the United States, and I don't think that is ever in question. So I often will talk to journalists or others and talk about sort of the quiet civil war that's been going on. I will make distinctions so that they understand that this is a small subgroup of the Turkish people who is trying to overturn a democratically elected leader in that country. And I think that most of the people that I've spoken to are smart enough to understand the distinction and smart enough to sort of draw that line. But I agree with you, we are trying to get into court in different circumstances, and we are trying to bring this. It's a very closed loop. The analogy to the mafia that Mark makes is a very strong one. It's a very strong one.
Thank you very much, John. We thank both John and Mark for the information they shared with us today. That was very informative, very eye-opening. And I'm sure they will agree with me if I say that here what we really want you to take away from this event. There's a group of people living in the United States that have long been designated as a terrorist organization in Turkey. They are here presenting themselves as educators, but they are not. They are a threat to my country, and they are a threat to the United States, and they are a threat to the countries they are present around the world. There are very serious allegations about this group, and sadly, many people from my own country involved in those allegations: fraud, mismanagement, misuse of taxpayers' money, wasting the public resources. These allegations should be very seriously investigated. That's what we really want you to take away from here. Please contact your local authorities, your elected officials, to ask what is it exactly the local authorities are doing and how seriously are they taking these allegations. There are a number of complaints filed with different states, and probably they are being taken seriously. Perhaps we're not aware of this, but if not, please, as concerned people, the citizens of this country, please follow this and ask your local authorities and elected officials how they are following and investigating these serious issues. In my remarks earlier, I mentioned about a national security threat. In Turkey, we believe that these people are part of a larger network, which has been designated as a terrorist organization. But earlier, before coming here, I talked to Mark and John that it is not easy for the ordinary, the people in the United States to understand what is it exactly we mean when we refer to these people as terrorists. Because the ordinary people in this country probably believe that terrorists can only live in the Middle East, carry AK-47s, dress in Middle Eastern clothes, and carry out some suicide bomb attacks. But not in this case. There are people in this country, according to our laws, doing terrible things and qualified as terrorist organization in Turkey. But with Mark's and John's work, they're following a different narrative. And as I said earlier, their narrative is why the people in the United States should be worried about these people. Forget about the national security issue to an ally and friendly country thousands of miles away from the United States. But as parents, as the citizens in this country, why should you take these allegations very seriously? Please do not underestimate this, especially considering what happened in Turkey July 15, 2016. With that, I would like to thank you very much once again for being with us today on this Sunday. And you don't have to leave right now because probably our guests will stay among us for some time more. And also we have snacks and drinks to offer you. And you can, while leaving, take one of the copies of both some of the publications about what happened in Turkey last year and also Mark Hall's Killing Yet documentary. Again, thank you very much for being with us today. Thank you.